So Thomas Culhane, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Thomas Culhane is a professor at University of South Florida and the director of the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Concentration, and he is a live-in board director of the Rosebud Continuum Eco Science Center, where he integrates all of his Nexus thinking. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Thomas.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here. This is exciting.
So we talked beforehand about playing a song, a clip of a song to kind of tee up our conversation. So I'm going to do that really quick right now, and then we'll get into our questions. Up must come down, spinning wheel, got to go round. Talking about your troubles, it's a crying sin. A painted pony, let the spinning wheel spin. So that was Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and the song is Spinning Wheel. So what is it about that song and those lyrics that resonate with you?
Well, we go into sustainability because we want to avoid blood, sweat, and tears. That song came out when I was first attentive to the early Earth Day events as a child in the 1970s in New York, and Blood, Sweat, and Tears actually recorded in our town. And so we got to know them, and they gave us a free album, and I listened to it over and over. And I was fascinated by this name, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and I was fascinated by these lyrics, and ended up playing that song in my band when I was in high school. And the more I thought about it, I thought we really are spinning our wheels. We had all this momentum with Earth Day, and then things started collapsing, less than a decade later, and all that enthusiasm. The EPA had been formed, and we'd had civil rights and women's rights, and we'd had all these gains in environmental and social justice awareness. And I thought, why? Why are we spinning our wheels? And the more I thought about those lyrics as I went into the world working with National Geographic, working with the US Embassy, working as a scholar with Mercy University, with the University of South Florida, and you're taking students around the world and you're going up into these mountains. Like 2 weeks ago, we were in Sopetran, Colombia, doing a project to try to mitigate the climate change effects on the cacao plantations. They're causing the prices of chocolate to escalate. Everybody sees that. It's because there's these fungi that are taking over the plantations and infecting the pods because one measure it's too moist for too long, and then it's too dry for too long. And the stressors on our vegetation in the world and our animal populations are untenable. And then you have this situation where you have altitude, you've got gravity to deal with, and most of the world's wildlife today, and much of our really good agroforestry, which is the salvation of humanity and nature, the idea of trees as perennials as opposed to lowland monocropping agriculture, which is causing such devastation. Most of it is in these areas that are mountainous. And so as we were going up the hill and we saw all this garbage that tourists and visitors and villagers and just industry, everybody's bringing stuff up the mountain, and it's so expensive and so difficult to get it back down that it's containers and cans and bottles and plastic wrapping just contaminating these beautiful areas. There's water pollution from the soaps and the shampoos and the detergents that have been brought up these mountains now, and people expect to have spotlessly shiny clothes, and all that's washing down in getting caught in these riparian habitats and contaminating the agroforestry and other agricultural plots. And you start thinking, wow, more blood, sweat, and tears is going to be expended in trying to deal with this because we're using the wrong paradigm. And so I thought, what if we could sing, "What goes up must never come down. Don't spin your wheels, you gotta come round to a new way of thinking." A paradigm shift where you say there is no such thing as waste. And this is something I teach in our Waste Not, Want Not, Reconsidering Refuse as a Resource class at USF. If we take the garbage can out of our minds, if we remove waste as a noun and think of it only as a verb or an adjective, like, hey, you wasted those organic residues. Hey, you wasted those hydrocarbons that are embodied in solid solid oil, aka plastic. Hey, you're wasting these opportunities. You're expending energy and increasing entropy when you should be working toward neg entropy. And then the students say, well, what's that? And that's negative entropy, where you use your presence as a human being and other physical and biological processes to spin the wheel up, 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 so that you're evolving, not revolving. You're not spinning your wheels, as they say, in the mud. You're spinning in a vortical fashion. And I call this now in my classes the vortical economy, not the circular economy, because the circular economy is a nice concept. And we've talked about recycling in the circle, but often we're recycling the wrong things in the wrong way, and it's not being done effectively. And it's because we're stuck in the mud, spinning our wheels. Whereas in a vortical or helical economy, imagine the difference between the healing vortex that lifts you up and gives you a bird's eye view of your problems and solves them at different levels, and the trauma vortex, which drags you down the gravity well and down the spiritual and emotional well into depression, right? Depression literally means going down, right? Depressed down. If we then thought of a vortical economy where we used our appreciation of climate in its real original sense, klima in Greek means slope. The climate, we noticed, changed as you moved up mountains. Then we applied it to voyagers going up latitude, and they realized that there were temperature differences and there were weather differences going up slopes, up latitude. So that's what climate was all about. And we're not climbing it anymore. In a sense, we're caught in a climate spiral of death. So I thought, let's turn it all around. Let's use the funness of this song, and let's say what we bring is resource. We're bringing the periodic table with us wherever we go, we humans, just as birds bring seeds places, and just as squirrels bring nuts and bury them. We could be agents of positive change if everything we bring up, we actually upcycle. To use, to use William McDonough and John Braungart's cradle to cradle philosophy. But cradle to cradle doesn't have to be, again, a spiral of death, a circular spiral. It can literally be out of the grave, where the cradle is always getting higher and higher until humanity leaves its home cradle, Earth, and reaches the stars and brings goods with us, not bads. I mean, I don't want to terraform Mars and destroy it. I would like to see that human beings have agency to take all the goods that we can transform previous bads into goods on this planet, and then we don't know how far we want to spread with all the greatness. That would be the sort of the gospel. That would be the evangelical moment where we take the good news that, hey, we humans are good. We're really good creatures working in alliance with the microbial gifts that are here, and working with the plants and the animals and the protozoans and the fungi, right? We're all good when we work together, and then we elevate.
Yeah, this is also relevant to something I've heard you talk about before, which is Nexus Thinking. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that is and how you think about it, specifically the energy, water, food nexus, and how you think about that, how we might navigate in that nexus and using Nexus Thinking.
Oh, I'm delighted every opportunity I get to talk about the nexus, because a nexus, of course, is a node or a ganglion, and our brains function the way they do because of nexuses, nodes where the neurons meet, and nature works because there's these rhizomal networks, these mycorrhizae, and where they meet, you'll get a fruiting body, whether it's a literal mushroom that's coming up as part of the mycelial network that's down there. That's a node, that's a nexus, the mushroom itself. Or it could be, a forest, and each tree is a nexus filled with life, filled with communication, filled with cohesion, where things have come together. So the biomimicry suggests that these models persist, these things work. And Nexus Thinking is trying to unlock that ancient knowing that's within literally every organism, but certainly those of us who have advanced big ganglia. We can put things together. And so the nexus is food, energy, water. Those are the three fundamentals. But then there's the ecology that subtends them. And so now in Europe, they're calling it the WEFI nexus. We called it the FEW nexus here, food, energy, water nexus. But now it's the water, energy, food, ecology nexus. And students often ask, well, what about waste? Why isn't that in the title? And I'll say, because we're eliminating it as a concept, as a noun. So we don't need it. what we're really looking at is not the few nexus, I'll say, but the more nexus, where we're actually bringing value, adding value when we create these incredible mycelial or rhizomal or neuronal connections. And nexus thinking then is a natural process if you take into consideration the sort of five-dimensional environments that we've inhabited since we first evolved our consciousness. So there's always the XYZ, 3 dimensions of space. So you've got, your horizon, your horizontal, and you've got your width, depth, and length, right? And then you've got time, a fourth dimension, if you like. But then you've got data, you've got value, you've got conceptual frameworks. That adds a fifth or more dimension to the nexus. And you have to sort of consider them all simultaneously. And the people who get it most are, gamers who see so many different permutations and different ways of arranging things, because they're always taking nexus bird's eye views and then micro views and then macro views and then micro. They're Necker cubing is the word for it. When you see a 3-dimensional cube, one face appears to be forward, then you switch your perspective and then another. You're constantly reinterpreting your model of reality so that you don't miss important strands of this weave. And you know that if you tug on one, oh, we're going to improve food production here, it's going to affect the amount of water that's available. If you try to change the amount of water, it's going to affect the amount of energy available. We want to find ways where you can grow food, energy, and water as valuable goods for all living beings, not just humans, because we exist in this wefty ecosystem. And then by so doing, we want to create systems that are robust, because we recognize the value of each node in the nexus and know that we need to maintain as we pull on different strands. We don't want to rip, tear, or eliminate one of those nodes. So we're doing complexification, which is what evolutionary process has always done, right? It starts with a single cell, perhaps, and then before you know it, you have incredible biomes that have evolved. So we're just trying to get back in sync with a way of thinking that our ancestors, by default, already had built big brains for. We think our education system, ironically, has dumbified our children, and that dumbification that James Scott talks about in his book, Seeing Like a State, how schemes to improve the human condition have failed. He talks about the dumbification because we've reduced the complexity of our ecosystems. We've torn out pieces of the puzzle and we have not put it back together. And then we keep talking about Humpty Dumpty as though it's impossible, because we then tell people the second law of thermodynamics says every system tends to decay and fall apart. That's the law of entropy. Things fall apart, suck it up and deal with it. That death and taxes are inevitable. And we know from certain people in the elites portions of the world that taxes aren't inevitable for some people at all. And death may not be either, at least if you define it more broadly, so that life is this continuance of these upward spiraling concepts.
Well, that also brings up another question I had related to population and how we think about the human population and Earth's capacity. And I've heard you talk about again this nexus thinking related to population. I wonder if you could talk about you explain in one of your videos or you refute the Malthusian explanation of population and the kind of this population bomb. Could you talk about that and within the context of this nexus thinking?
Darn straight. I'm going to always insist, as I did back in high school when I first became aware of this, that Malthus was wrong. And Malthus' history seems to suggest to us he was not a biologist. He was not a population ecologist. He was a reverend who had ideas against immigration. He believed that there were certain people who were undesirable that were coming to England and creating problems. So he had a polemic that he wanted to convince people of, and it was that we needed to radically reduce the population. So he made this claim that populations grow geometrically. After all, they're having too much sex, right? They're having babies all the time. These people who didn't, they don't have much self-discipline. And then he would say, but food grows only arithmetically. And he'd draw this graph where you had this curve that was rising exponentially this way. And then you had the food curve. So this was human population. The food curve was going like this. And then there'd be this point where you'd have overshoot. And we were supposed to then expect the only way to deal with it was the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Or we could deliberately engineer wars and immigration policies and sterilization and whatever other draconian methods we need. But it bothered me in high school biology. We'd hear this, and yet we would be working with Petri dishes and we would be, studying biology out in the field. And I kept noticing that food was a population. These were animals and plants and fungi and microbes we were talking about. And like all populations, they grow exponentially if allowed to. In the Petri dish, they'd hit walls and limits. And in a rat cage with that famous Calhoun experiment, they crowd the cage so much that they'd start devouring one another. Okay, so why not expand the box? Don't just think outside the box. Expand the cage, expand the box, expand consciousness. Try to think of ways where you allow plants and animals and our insect populations, for example. Did Malthus ever consider that the insects that he might talk about when he reads the Old Testament, the plague of locusts, that in Nigeria, people would run out when locusts came during locust season with baskets and celebrate, calling it manna from heaven, much richer than the low nutritional crops that they were growing. And that it was the British that made them hate locusts because then they couldn't sell their cash crops, which had a market demand in Europe. So they'd say to Nigerians, get rid of those locusts. And this would go back to the time of Pharaoh, right? This would go back to the time when there was a market economy that was based on trade value for certain commodities, and locusts were inconvenient, but not to the local population, because it's high protein and really nutritious fat. And they'd be like, yay, God's sending us all this food from the sky that beats, eating molokhia. I mean, for crying out loud, or spinach. Then you have this idea of the plague of frogs. Well, any Frenchman could tell you, oh mon Dieu, is the grenouille, they're jumping right into my plate, my dinner plate. I mean, ratatouille, and I don't want to suggest that we eat poor Remy and ratatouille, but if rodents are your population, roasted rodent on a stick. We were eating in Guatemala tepescuintli, which is a giant rodent that lives there. And nobody ever said, oh, there's too many tepescuintli. You just go to the restaurant and order another one. Same with capybara. So, I mean, this can apply to literally any animal that we consider a pest. My wife and I here at Rosebud Continuum Eco Science Center, we have it's not a machine, it's a breeding area for soldier flies. And they come in and they eat, the carcass of the turkey or whatever animal dies or whatever we throw in it, food waste. And then we get these beautiful larvae that climb up a little hill and they fall into a basket, and then we feed the chickens. But my wife and I have cooked them up and eat them ourselves. And when school kids come, I'll grab the live wriggling soldier fly larvae and pop them in my mouth like popcorn. And they go, ew, but they find it fun. Insectivory is incredibly important. Now imagine if we changed our paradigm and said Nexus Thinking suggests that we should be going for the highest value protein and lipid source that we can. We don't want to spread any pesticides. We don't recognize pests as a category, or weeds. I mean, we eat here often things that people consider weeds, the purslane that grows by itself here, or the pennyfoil plants. And other people are busy tearing them out, or dandelions, which the Italians brought over to make dandelion wine and dandelion salads. Why are we making industries to kill off food that's growing geometrically? And then claiming, oh, we're starving, price of food is too high. Well, get rid of your lawn, plant food, watch it grow. What about your parking lot and your roof space? So that's where we get into this idea that we're just mismanaging our land, our landscape, our properties, and we're leading to this metabolic rift where the countryside simply cannot supply, with the methods we use, the kind of populations of food that we as a growing human population depend on.
So that metabolic rift, the idea of a metabolic rift, can you talk about that more, and thinking about like how we think about the role of cities right now, and the kind of this metabolic rift between urban and rural that we've created, and how we maybe could change that or think differently about that?
Oh, absolutely. And it's one of my favorite tropes as a urban planner. I graduated with a master's and a PhD from UCLA in urban planning. So that's actually where I cut my teeth. And I was fascinated by urban ecology. And I remember reading the book Triumph of the City. I think it's by Glazer. I'm not getting the name wrong, just names in the top of my head. But the Triumph of the City, how cities can make us healthier, smarter, and greener, was a really seminal text for many of us because it suggested that cities are agglomeration economies where you bring stuff together and concentrate them. And by the same token, they've become problems because we're also agglomerating so-called bads. So people are going to the bathroom after they're eating. Food that is not consumed is rotting in the city. You have concentration of vehicles, and because they're fossil fuel powered for the most part, they're agglomerating carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, right? All these other so-called bads. Um, you see all of these problems at their core are simply because urban design is flawed, not because the concept of coming together. And there's another song for you, "Come Together Right Now Over Sustainability." I mean, if the Beatles had written it that way. So you have this idea that if we come together and we say, as Dixon Despommier does in The Vertical Farm, his book from Columbia University about how cities can use all that available, not just roof space, as the city of Chicago did when Mayor Daley did all the green roof things, but the vertical surface, and I've seen this in China, and I've seen it in Medellin, Colombia, the green city of Medellin. They say, well, the sun in most parts of the planet isn't directly overhead. It's only there overhead in the equator. So as you move around the globe, the sun is usually at an angle. So if you grow on a flat surface called the countryside, you're not getting as much use per acre as you do if you move the surface like this, because now the sun is shining on the south face in the north hemisphere, the north and the southern. You're getting all this growing area with a footprint that is only this big in terms of surface area. And you also have that footprint right there on the top of the building. It didn't go anywhere. It just went. So the land is just simply raised up, getting that sunlight. So you could have all that farming going on there. You've got all this surface here. And then you've got these streets, which you could cover with canopies that could be greened as well. In Japan, I saw carports that were covered, trellised with kiwi fruit, for example. I've seen in Mexican families, they use chaya, which is a trellising vine that is as good as a potato. I mean, there's plants will just take over, and they always do in apocalyptic dystopian movies, right? People are gone. Now the city has deer in it and it's got, plants everywhere. Well, why not while we're still there? It would make the city more beautiful, as they do in Medellin. It makes the air fresher. Medellin, we go there every year with students from Mercy University, New York. In Medellin, they have avocado trees and lemon trees and papaya trees and mango trees all the way up and down the streets and in the parks. Nobody fights over the fruit. The vendors are still there. They pick up the fruit for free. They slice it, dice it, add salt or whatever, mix it up, put it in the blender, and they sell it. But nobody stops the homeless person from going and picking up some fruit. It's nonsense. Nobody's slipping and falling and because it's dangerous and suing. It's just the city is filled with trees and it's 2 degrees cooler than every other city in the area. So we know that greening the city gives us opportunities. And think of another one. You pipe water up for all the bathrooms and showers and sinks. So now you have gravity feed going down that could feed all of these urban farms because you're already piping it up for another purpose. This is what they call in permaculture, right? Function stacking. That you don't let anything serve one purpose, just like you would never use a single-use plastic bag. You'd use the bag as many times and for many purposes as possible. So let's talk for a second about plastic. Cities harbor an enormous amount of plastic, and now they're saying it's washing down city rivers and leaching from landfills, and there'll be more plastic in the ocean than fish within a decade or so. Okay. Plastic is a very valuable hydrocarbon. What we do at the Rosebud Continuum Ecoscience Center here in Land of Lakes, and my wife can attest to this, we stopped taking out the garbage 7 years ago when National Geographic had me up in Washington and they did their Planet and Plastic pledge. And we took the pledge and we just stopped taking out the garbage. We're never going to take it out again. So we were accumulating it and we're washing all of our plastics, yogurt cups, and mustard packets because we want the organic material in our biodigesters. We happen to have many biodigesters here that turn 100% of our organic residuals, food waste, you'd call them, into fuel and fertilizer. So that's settled. Everything's clean. We stored it in bins until we were able to get a grant to get plastic shredding crushing, granulating machines and glass crushing machines. And now that we have those machines here, 100% of what we produce, I don't care, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other, all of it gets crushed into tiny particles. The glass is crushed into sand with the labels on. We mix it with 1 part cement, 2 parts sand that we made from our glass bottles, and 3 parts plastic shred from everything, chips, bags, Mylar, PVC, it doesn't matter. It turns into something we call trashcrete. We're using it to make animal sculptures that are life-size all over the nature trails here, paving stones, benches, fountains. Think of trashcrete like the shapecrete that Disneyland uses for making all those cool environments with the waterfalls. We've run out of garbage. We've had to start importing from students their trash, but then we ask them to do the shredding because that's where the labor comes in. So there is a labor cost, and then machines have to be maintained. But now that we have these machines, what garbage? Now imagine a city saying, hey, we don't have to give anything away. And they go, get off my land with your garbage truck. You don't get my SHI. You know what? That's mine. I went to Walmart. I bought the banana. The part of the banana that went through me, that's my SHI. You know what? And it's going in my biodigester to get the phosphorus and the potassium and the nitrogen back. The banana peel, I peeled and put into the biodigester as well. So I got that totally reclaimed. And then I took a plastic bag. I double bagged it because I'm stealing hydrocarbons from y'all if you're going to give it away for free. And you ain't getting that from me either because I'm turning that into my paving stones and my benches and my fences and my sculptures. So get the hell out. If we use that kind of ownership over so-called waste, realizing that we're wasting opportunities, the urban metabolism would end the metabolic rift. We wouldn't need the countryside. We would trade with the countryside. It could go wild. We could rewild. We could let people who like living off the land, let them live their lives, let it become an ecological and agricultural permaculture paradise. And then in the city, we'd be taking care of our business, taking dirty business and making it okay, right? And we would then trade just because we love one another and we want to always make our lives more interesting, but we wouldn't have this metabolic rift where the countryside is producing everything for this growing urban population threat and it can't keep up and it's using pesticides and herbicides and plowing and desertification is happening. The Dust Bowl is going to happen again. We all have to go to another planet, like in that movie, whatever that movie was called.
Interstellar.
Yeah, Interstellar. Ridiculous, you know. Instead, you'd be like, oh, you guys want some okra? We're growing some great okra out here. Well, sure, if you want some of our urban tomatoes. And I know this works because I lived with the Zabaleen garbage recycling population in Cairo, Egypt for my PhD, in the middle of the city that they built brick by brick themselves, no government support. They have cows on the 2nd floor, sheep on the top of the building, goats walking up and down the stairs of the 4-story apartment building, solar panels, rooftop gardens, donkeys. I knocked on my friend's door to see him, and I was in the wrong bedroom, and there was a cow giving birth to a calf on the 3rd floor. I mean, these are people who were kicked off the land when privatization turned the countryside into a for-profit machine, a sort of open-air factory. So they took all their animals and their plants and they just moved to the outskirts of the city, and they live by gathering all of the so-called garbage in their donkey carts and pickups, bring it back, sort it, they clean it, they recycle it, and then they sell it to countries at a high value. So you go around the world and you see these models, Joe, and you're like, we have the solutions. Oh my gosh, somewhere in the world, there is a group of people who are living the way we ought to. We just haven't brought it all together.
Hmm. Well, that's inspiring to hear that there is this work and there are solutions out there. I wonder, just to kind of wrap up, if you could talk about what you see as the kind of what individuals can do, how you think about the role of the individual and what they can do to pursue and advance sustainability.
I've got an answer for that, for sure, that I feel a lot of conviction about. We have to all be negentropic, right? So entropy must be defeated locally. I know the universe is winding down. I get it. And the sun eventually is going to swallow the earth and then it's going to itself, dissipate. Right. I mean, the time zero is brutal. I get that. Blood, sweat, and tears. La, la, la. But with this vortical economy that we're talking about, we can reverse entropy locally by using these enormous energy streams that are coming from the sun, which is a fusion reactor safely 93 million miles away, and using the fission reactor beneath our feet. That's the geothermal core of the world. And then all the derivative processes that nuclear reactor inside the Earth, naturally there, and the other one way up there in space, are driving wind power, solar power, micro hydropower. I mean, all these things, because we live on a vortical planet that turns and turns, creating the Coriolis effect. And so there's a dynamism, there's plenty of energy, and we have to get in sync with that and help lift this up. And there's a group I'm part of that you should all join on LinkedIn called Beyond Profit Towards a Purpose-Driven Economy. And one of the authors of that site and the works coming out based on it, Dr. Victoria Hirth, has talked about logic 3, where you go from logic 1, which is make a quick profit as quickly as possible at anybody's expense, because it's a dog eat dog world, and gosh, it's all going to go to hell anyway, so get your kicks while you can. You abandon that. You abandon logic 2 thinking, which is I'm going to be green, I'm going to do less harm, I'm going to try to do no harm, asymptotically get toward no harm, I'm going to see if I can add some value, slow down the pace of degradation and exploitation, but I still accept that some has to happen because things are going to fall apart anyway. You go to logic 3, which is really an indigenous perspective. And the logic 3 is 7 generations minimum of thought with your Nexus systems thinking. And you say, how can I not just do no harm, but how can I add value? My life, my activities have to increase biodiversity, increase cultural diversity, increase respect, increase the joy that people are having, end the suffering. And that logic 3 in this vortical thing implies that we stop trying to think globally and act locally. We've heard that since the first Earth Day. I'm sorry, Joe, I don't buy it. We can't. I know I can't, and I'm pretty well educated. I can't think globally. I do GIS studies, global information, geographic information systems. I'm looking at the world all the time from outer space, zooming in and zooming out with my Nexus Thinking classes. It's overwhelming. Then I go out in the field, like I'm going to Morocco, up into these mountains, and I have to work on this water pollution problem. And I've looked at it from the map. I've zoomed in and out. I got pictures. I'm going there. We went there last November. You have to think intensely locally. It's called in Greek metis, which means local knowledge that is indigenous and cannot be easily replicated. And then there's techne, which is a globalized understanding that can be replicated. And between metis and techne, you have to find a way where you can say, I'm with you, I'm listening to you, I'm observing, I'm using all my faculties, and I'm getting that deep knowing, that lived experience. Now let's solve the problem locally. So think locally, act locally, and thereby have a ripple effect globally, where you don't go and impose and parachute in and say, I've got a USAID solution that I can do. I've worked with USAID, done wonderful things with their small infrastructure grants. Believe me, it was welcome at the time. We now know it's been erased. The world is panicking. Well, let's deal with this moment and turn lemons into lemonade, right? If there's no aid coming, then we have to help ourselves, but not cut off, isolated. In an ecosystem, we share with one another, as you're doing with me and with your audience today. We're all talking together. And we share our local triumphs and our local solutions, and then see, would you like to share yours? Does it work? Would my solution work for your backyard? No, how could we modify it? I'll end with this. In my teaching, we call it, according to an anthropologist from Italy who worked with me in the Urban Health Conference in Valencia, and then we've been working at the Urban Health Conferences in Morocco. She called it the Maieutic method. She said, you're not doing Socratic dialogue. You're not having a debate. It's not thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Let's go at it. Let's see who wins, like we have in our presidential and political debates. There's no debate at all. Socrates had a student, Plato, who recorded all of Socrates' work. And Plato said the preferred method is Maieutic, which means midwife in Greece, where you take an idea and you offer it out there and go, look at, this is the idea I birthed. And someone else says, oh, cute, what a nice baby. Hey, I noticed that it could use a little adjustment here. Let's fix this there. And what about your baby? And then let's have them play together. And Maieutically, as midwives do, you start cooperating to make sure every idea is properly aligned and grows properly. And some ideas will be subsumed into others, and some will be put back on the back burner until they can be better thought, but there's no competition at all. It's really just this Maieutic idea that we can spiral up out of the mud that we're stuck in because every being has value. And when every being in a locale works together for its own benefit, and there's your capitalism and your sort of, self-interests, Adam Smith. Remember that Adam Smith's theory, Wealth of Nations, was a minor work based in his larger book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, where he said, if everybody behaved morally, which they get from their mothers and their midwives, then acting in your own self-interest is in the interest of all. That's logic 3. You're acting together for yourself and everything because you realize you're not yourself anymore. You are a part of the ecosystem, and that is true Nexus thinking.
Awesome. Well, that's a really powerful idea, and I hope it resonates with a lot of people. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, and I hope we'll get to have another conversation.
I would very much enjoy that. Let the conversation go on and on and on and on sustainably. Thanks.